Hey there, friend. I want to take you back with me for a moment. Back to a place that smells a little like old paper, a little like cedar wood, and a lot like memories. You see, up in my grandfather's attic, there was this old, dusty typewriter. The kind with heavy keys that clacked loud enough to make the whole house know you were writing something important. That typewriter wasn't just a machine, it was a storyteller. My grandpa would sit there for hours, tapping away, his glasses slipping down his nose, a cup of coffee getting cold beside him. I remember watching him, wondering what worlds he was building with those words. He told me once, every key you press is a step deeper into the story you want to live. Some of his stories were funny, like the one about a farmer who taught his cow to dance. Others were sad, about people saying goodbye at train stations. But my favorites? Oh, those were the love stories. He had a way of making love feel timeless. Not the kind you swipe left or right for, the kind you wait for, you hold on to, even if it takes a lifetime. I'd sneak up into that attic when he wasn't around. I wasn't supposed to, but curiosity has always been my troublemaker. I'd pull out one of those stories, still warm from the ribbon ink, and read it under the dim light bulb hanging by a cord. Sometimes I didn't understand the big words, but I understood the feeling. I understood the heart of it. One rainy afternoon, I sat beside him as he typed. The sound of raindrops on the roof mixed with the click-clack of the keys. "Listen," he said, "writing is like catching rain. Every drop is a word, and together they make a river." I didn't fully get it then, but now I know exactly what he meant. Grandpa's attic was more than a room. It was a time capsule. There were boxes of postcards, a chest full of old blankets, and shelves lined with books so old their pages had turned soft and yellow. And in the middle of it all, that typewriter sat like a king on his throne, waiting for the next story to be born. He told me he bought it after the war, with money he'd saved from fixing radios. "It was the first thing I bought for myself," he said, "and I've never regretted it." That machine had been with him through heartbreaks, new beginnings, and the quiet, ordinary days that are secretly the most important of all. Some nights I'd lie in bed and hear him typing downstairs. The sound was steady, comforting. It was like a heartbeat for the whole house. I'd imagine the characters he was bringing to life. Farmers, soldiers, dreamers, and people who just wanted a little more love than the world usually gave them. One day he handed me a sheet fresh from the typewriter. "Here," he said, "this one's for you." It was a story about a little boy who found a magic pen in his grandfather's attic. I laughed, realizing he had turned me into the main character without even asking. We'd read together, his voice low and steady, the words rolling like warm honey. He didn't rush, didn't hurry the ending. He always said the ending is just as important as the beginning, sometimes more. There was this one short story he wrote called The Last Letter. It was about a soldier writing home, not knowing if he'd make it back. Even now, when I think of it, I feel that lump in my throat. He had a way of making you care about someone in just a few paragraphs. Sometimes he'd stop typing and just stare out the window. I once asked what he was looking at. He said, "Nothing in particular. I'm just listening to the story before I write it down." The attic had one small round window, and in the evenings the golden light would spill across the typewriter keys. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. It felt like magic was hiding in that room, waiting for the right moment to appear. Once I asked if he ever thought about using a computer. He chuckled. "Son, a computer doesn't make music. This old thing sings when I write." And honestly, he was right. That click-clack was its own kind of melody. One summer, the ribbon on the typewriter broke. I thought that was it. No more stories. But he calmly opened a drawer, pulled out a spare, and in minutes it was ready again. "Always be prepared to keep telling your story," he said. There was a particular smell in that attic, a mix of machine oil, paper, and wood. If I close my eyes right now, I can still smell it. Funny how scent can pull you back through time faster than anything else. I remember one story he wrote about a train that only came at midnight. If you got on, it would take you anywhere you wanted, but only once. You had to choose carefully. I asked him where he'd go. He smiled and said, "Right here." The keys had letters worn off from years of use, but his fingers knew exactly where to go. It was like the stories were already inside him, and the typewriter was just the bridge to bring them out. Sometimes he'd get stuck in the middle of a story. He never forced it. He'd just go downstairs, make some tea, and let the words find their way back. Stories are like shy cats, he told me. You have to let them come to you. One afternoon, I caught him smiling at the page before he even started typing. "This one's special," he whispered. He never told me why. I guess some stories are meant to be understood, not explained. In the winter, the attic got cold, so he'd wear an old sweater with holes at the elbows. He said it was his thinking sweater. I think it just felt like a hug while he worked. Once during a thunderstorm, the lights went out. Instead of stopping, he lit a candle and kept typing. The shadows on the wall looked like the characters had come to life. He kept a small tin box next to the typewriter, filled with little trinkets, a coin, a feather, a dried flower. Each one was a reminder of a story he'd written. When I asked why he wrote so much, he simply said, "Because one day I won't be here to tell you in person." That hit me harder than I expected. One morning I found him asleep at the desk, his head resting on his arms, the page half finished. I quietly left him there, the typewriter keeping his dream company. And you know, the attic wasn't just his space. Over time, it became mine, too. A place where stories lived, where the past felt close enough to touch. Grandpa used to say stories were like seeds. You plant them in someone's mind, and even if you're not there to see it, they grow. Sometimes they grow into trees, sometimes into wildflowers, but they always leave the world prettier than before. That's why he typed, even on days when his hands ached and the attic felt colder than winter itself. There was a small crack in the attic window, and in the fall, leaves would blow in. I'd find them scattered near the typewriter, as if nature was leaving him little bookmarks. He never threw them away. Instead, he'd press them between the pages of his notebooks, saying, "Every leaf has a story too if you know how to listen." One afternoon, I sat across from him with my own notebook, trying to copy his style. But no matter how I tried, my words felt smaller, less magical. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Don't try to write like me. Write like you. The world doesn't need another me. It needs your voice." That stuck with me like glue. He had a drawer full of old ribbons for the typewriter, each stained with the ghosts of stories past. I once unrolled one and saw faint letters like whispers from another time. He caught me and chuckled. "Careful, you might read something not meant for today." I quickly rolled it back, feeling like I'd touched time itself. Winter mornings in the attic were special. The cold air made every breath visible, little clouds floating between us as he typed. I'd wrap myself in a quilt, listening to the steady music of the keys. The sun would creep in slowly, painting gold on the dust. It felt like we were the only two people awake in the whole world. Once he wrote a story about a lighthouse keeper who never left his post. The man never saw the ships he saved, but he kept the light burning every night. "That's what writing is," Grandpa told me. "You may never see the people you help, but you keep the light on anyway." I think about that a lot these days. The attic had this smell when it rained. Damp wood, ink, and the faint sweetness of old tea leaves. It wrapped around you like a memory you couldn't quite place. Sometimes I'd sit up there with my eyes closed, letting the sound of rain and the typewriter mix into one long, comforting song I wished would never end. He kept a single photograph on the wall, a black and white picture of him as a young man, sitting on a park bench with a woman I'd never met. When I asked, he just said, "She's in a lot of my stories." I never pushed for more, but sometimes I'd catch him staring at it before he began to type. There was an old floorboard in the attic that squeaked no matter how careful you were. I once asked if he ever fixed it. He shook his head. That squeak is part of the story up here. And you know, I came to love that sound too. It meant someone was coming to join the world of words. One summer night, a moth kept fluttering near the lamp while he typed. Instead of shooing it away, he paused and wrote a short piece about it. Sometimes, inspiration has wings, he told me. The story was about a traveler drawn to light, not knowing it was also the thing that could hurt him. I never forgot that. He had this old metal cup for his pens. They were all mismatched, some broken, some chewed at the ends. I asked why he kept them, and he said, "Every pen has written something worth remembering." It made me think how even the smallest tools can leave marks that outlast the hands that held them. When I was a teenager, I brought him a brand new notebook as a gift. The pages were so white they almost glowed. He ran his hand over them and said, "Ah, fresh snow for new footprints." He filled that notebook slowly, like each word deserved its own little ceremony before finding its place on the page. I once asked if he'd ever publish his stories. He smiled and shook his head. These stories know where they belong. They belong here, with us. At the time, I thought it was strange not to share them with the world. Now I understand, some things are more precious because they're kept close. One particularly hot day, the attic felt like an oven. I asked why we didn't just go downstairs. He laughed. Because stories don't like to travel mid-sentence. They need to finish where they started. So we stayed, sweating through our shirts, but finishing the chapter anyway. That day, I learned dedication has its own kind of beauty. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence, close his eyes, and smile like he'd just heard a joke no one else could. When I asked, he said, "That's the story telling me its own secret ending." I always wondered if he was just making it up, or if stories really do speak back to the person writing them. In the attic corner, there was a stack of pages tied with string. He never let me read them. "Those are for later," he'd say. Years passed, and later never came. I think about those pages a lot, wondering what's in them. Maybe they were for a time when I'd understand more than I did back then. Once during a snowstorm, the roof started to creak under the weight. We could hear the wind whistling through the tiny cracks. But Grandpa just kept typing, as if the world outside couldn't touch the one he was building in that room. I realized then that writing can be a kind of shelter from the storm. He had a habit of tapping his foot while he typed, like there was music only he could hear. It wasn't fast, just a slow, steady beat that matched the rhythm of his words. Sometimes I'd tap along without even thinking, until it felt like we were both part of the same quiet song. There was a brass bell on the desk that he'd ring whenever he finished a story. No one else knew what it meant, but for us, it was a small celebration, a way of saying, another world has been born. That bell's sound is still clear in my memory, even after all these years. One rainy day, he wrote a story in just one sitting. No pauses, no tea breaks. When I asked why, he said, "Some stories are like storms. They need to pour out all at once." The pages were still warm when he handed them to me. Reading them felt like watching rain fall in slow motion, each drop heavy with meaning. There was a wooden box under the desk, filled with old postcards. Some were blank, others had messages in faded ink. He told me he bought them from flea markets, then wrote stories about the people who might have sent them. I realized then that imagination can turn even a stranger's handwriting into something deeply personal. On quiet afternoons, we'd hear the sound of the church bells from across town. He'd always stop typing to listen. "Bells mark time," he'd say, "but stories ignore it." It was his way of reminding me that in the attic, hours could pass without either of us noticing. Because we weren't just passing time, we were living it. He never threw away a bad page. Instead, he'd fold it neatly and put it in a drawer. "Even the wrong words got me closer to the right ones," he explained. That taught me something important. Mistakes aren't waste, they're stepping stones. Even now, I keep my own bad pages just to remember the past.